Welcome to the Indie Author Showcase, the podcast by indie authors for indie authors. I am your host, multi-award-winning author Chad Robert Morgan. Let's get started. So, some quick programming notes. Weekend of September 27th. Probably not be here. We will be at Sinister Book Fair up in Sacramento. So, please feel free to come visit us in person. That would be fantastic to reach out to new fans at a new part of the state and expand the reach of SpectraLink. Whoa. I think that would be great. Come see us there. For the next 2 weeks, I may not be able to do a podcast. I really can't go into the why right now. I think legally I can tell you why, but it's kind of like I don't want to risk it just in case. Just so you know, I'm going to be contractually busy for the next 2 weeks doing something. I will tell you more about it on the back end. Don't worry, your boy's not in trouble. Just something I got to get done. Don't really have a choice. Got to get it done. When it's done, I'll definitely be back. Hopefully I can still juggle things and keep the podcast going while I'm doing this. But if you don't see me for 2 weeks, that's why. Okay? Last thing I wanted to share with you is some conference news. Midsummer Scream is leaving Long Beach. That's right. Midsummer Scream is going back to apparently its original home in Anaheim. It is moving back to the Anaheim Convention Center. I didn't even know it started in the Anaheim Convention Center, to be honest, but that's what it said in the little email they sent out. So, what does this mean for us? I'm hoping this means that it's a bigger venue, right? Long Beach Convention Center is pretty large. I know Anaheim Convention Center from doing WonderCon, and they take over that main building, and it's rather large, but I don't think that's the only building available. So I'm wondering if they're going to have multiple buildings or if they're going to shut off an area for when they do their Haunted Mansion parts and everything like that, which is always one of the cooler parts of Midsummer Scream. So we'll see. What I hope this means is that they're going to have more space for more vendors. So people like me, who have been struggling to get into Midsummer Scream for forever, might finally be able to crack it open and get in there. Most conventions run on the same kind of rules. If you're there, you got first dibs to come back. And so that's why when you go to these conventions, like 90% of the people are the same people from the last time. Because if they skip a year, they're going to have the same issues that I'm having with Midsummer Scream to get back. So if just to keep their slot open, right, they'll keep coming back. And that's what we're seeing with some of these conventions is the turnout is actually still rather high. Monsterpalooza has still brought some serious crowds. Creep IE has done rather well. Their off-season one, Creep IE Aftermath, still is struggling, but their main show in February is usually off the hook. Monsterpalooza is still drawing huge crowds. Midsummer, I did not visit this year, but I saw the videos, and it is as typical line going around the Long Beach Convention Center. So, yeah, people are still showing up. Are people buying? Talk to the vendors, and they seem to have different opinions on that. But people are showing up. And if you're going to one of these shows as an author, you're probably thinking it more of a marketing experience than actually trying to sell books. Me personally, if I'm selling books at a convention, I'm basically just trying to break even, right? I don't do it for profit. I do it basically just to build a name for myself, to build an audience, and to have people aware of my work. The only thing that I really try to do is break even so it pays for itself, but I'm not really looking to make a profit when I do these shows. What is your experience? Do you go to these conventions and rake in the dough? Or are you doing these conventions and you're kind of taking it as a marketing expense? and redlining it. This is a cost. This is just the cost of doing business. What do you think? What's your opinion on these things? This week, I want to dive into a familiar topic because it just refuses to die. AI. Now, I want to attack the topic a little differently. So, last week we talked about the environmental impact of AI. Before that, when we were interviewing with Jennifer Milne, we were talking about more of the ethical use of using AI. This week, I want to talk a little bit more about how do we as artists live in a world that where AI wins. I'm hearing through the grapevine people struggling to motivate themselves to continue creating art in a space where somebody can just go deet, 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 and outperforms them. We're having people that are pushing AI sloth onto Amazon, and they're making money not through quality but through quantity, and that creates a problem for us as indie authors, because as for us who are trying to do it, you know, a more meaningful, more heartfelt way, we're already struggling because we're in an ocean of other indie authors. Now that ocean's getting deeper and deeper because of all these people that are just generating random crap. And if we have people that are self-publishing AI stuff, and we're self-publishing the stuff that we're spending weeks or months or even years cultivating and crafting, how do we convince people that that stuff is bad, this stuff is good, right? So where do we go as authors and as artists in this world where people are creating some impressive work by just typing in a few lines of code on the computer? Now, and I say impressive because, um, you know, there is still kind of an AI tell. I don't want to say that, oh, like Hollywood's done because we can just AI generate this stuff and everything. I still I dabble with AI, and I always wind up finding it lacking because AI tends to want to do what it wants to do and not what I want it to do. Uh, there is actually a new system. I haven't had a chance to play with it yet, introduced by Autodesk, where it's supposed to be the first AI you can control. Like, it doesn't just render the scene, it renders the elements of the scene, and then those elements can be modified. So, like, if you don't like the way the camera moves, you can grab the camera and literally change its path and say, no, I want it more like this, as an example. Is that where AI is going in the future, or is this just kind of a flash in the pan? I don't know. But I want to talk a little bit about how that affects us as authors and artists. Because, yeah, like I said, I'm hearing stories of people throwing up their hands and giving up, and I don't think that's the right answer. So let me cap this, or let me start this by talking about another time in history when technology forced the way we did art to change. So, coming out of the Renaissance period, there was a push for more and more realistic renderings in art, right? The artist was trying to capture the scene as realistically as possible. Basically, they were trying to make it photorealistic before photorealism was a thing, right? And then this little invention called the camera came along and made that obsolete, right? You couldn't use a paintbrush to capture something anywhere near as realistically as the camera could. Or if you could, it would take you an enormous amount of effort when the camera just go click, and it was done, right? I'm oversimplifying, but you get my point. The camera made that kind of rendering super cheap, super fast, super detailed, and the art world couldn't compete with that. But obviously, art didn't go away. Art decided that if it couldn't compete with the camera, it would go in a different style. That's when we started getting things like Impressionism. We started getting some more modern art, or like Cubism, Surrealism. We started painting, and I say we as a society, we started painting things that didn't exist. We started painting things in a way that the camera couldn't capture because the camera was limited to reality. Now the camera itself turned into an entire art form of its own. How do you manipulate that reality? How can you uh, create photographs that are dynamic and feel like they're moving, and how can you manage the lighting and all that kind of stuff? So there was a divergence, if you will. Creating art didn't go away, it evolved. It saw this challenge, and instead of surrendering, found new opportunities. It found areas that were lacking that the technology could do that it couldn't do. Let's go with a similar thing. When I was younger and things like Toy Story first came out, even before then, when they were doing CGI and things like Beauty and the Beast, right? Because you have the one scene where they're dancing in the ballrooms, CGI, and the characters are 2D. At the time, as a young man, I thought that was a cheat, right? Just like today, we think AI is a cheat. Because I'm like, oh, the computer is doing all these, camera angles and everything, and it's like doing all the math for you, as opposed to how do you hand draw that? And in the early days, I thought it was a cheat. Now, as time went on and CGI became more and more prevalent, it became obvious that CGI had its own issues and that it didn't really remove traditional hand drawn animation. But look what hand drawn animation turned into. We no longer had a lot of, very photorealistic type renderings in the cartoon space. I mean, we never really had photorealistic, but when we were animating our Saturday morning cartoons, for example, we were trying to animate like real people with giant robots or real people with cars or stuff like that. But you could do that on the computer like way easier once the technology evolved. So where do cartoons go to? Well, they wind up being simplified in a lot of ways. Um, and I don't mean that as um, they got easier to draw. They leaned into the fact that it was a hand drawn medium. Jenny Tartakovsky, for example, when he did Samurai Jack, really leaned into the idea of shapes and colors to convey the story. And even though the shapes were very simple when compared to like something like Michael Bay's Transformers, they were way more readable. And that was a design choice on purpose, right? Enemies and violent people would have sharp, hard, angular lines to look threatening with a minimalist approach. Uh, Animals on rolling hills would convey serenity and peace, and they were just very, wonk wonk wonk, very simple shapes. But again, that was a design aesthetic. Wasn't that these people couldn't draw? They were drawing it that way on purpose because, like with the photograph, art went away from trying to be photorealistic and try to convey more of a sense of feeling and emotion, trying to it knew it couldn't compete with reality, so it found a different avenue. And a lot of cartoons did the same thing. And in the end, the whole CGI thing became its own. Like, I remember when early, oh, it's just nothing but CGI slop and everything like that. But a lot of people spent a lot of time trying to make CGI art. Pixar, for example, there's a reason why they started with Toy Story. Because in the early days of CGI, computers were really good at rendering metal and plastic, right? Everything had a plastic look to it. Go rewatch the original Toy Story. Where does the visual fidelity drop? When the humans are on screen and when the dog is on screen. Because they really didn't know how to do that well back in those days. Pixar's movies were a test case for the technology. When they did Monsters Inc., that was the movie that they were going to master how to do fur, right? Because they had a lot of characters on there that had fur all over them. And they had one character that had their first cloth sim, and that was Boo. And she was a test case. Next movie, Incredibles. Cloth sim all over the place. They tested it in Monsters Inc. They mastered it in Incredibles, and then they moved on for the next challenge. Finding Nemo. There's a story where they're like, how do we render water? How do we render things that looks like it's underwater? They spent a lot of R&D time on this, and they actually had a sample image and then their rendered image, and they couldn't tell the difference. And that's when they went, okay, we need to bring it down a notch or two because this is still an animated movie. This is not ILM, right? They'd actually overshot and made it so realistic that they couldn't discern, and they had to tone it down to match their art style. But 2D animations didn't really go away during this time. I mean, they kind of, I mean, they evolved, they changed, but they didn't really go away. And if you look at it today, some of the best series that are on there are 2D animations from indie developers, such as Has Been Hotel, as an example. Um, Getting back to Jenny Tartakovsky, we got Primal on HBO. Art evolves to fill up the vacuum. When when uh, when you can when you have a device that can create photorealistic images, there's no need to paint photorealistic images. So what do you paint? Well, you figure out something else to paint. And that takes us back to this age of AI. Now, I don't know if AI is going to be a permanent fixture in our lives or if it's a bubble that's going to pop and it's just going to be a fad. I don't know. All right. I don't have a crystal ball. But what I can tell you is that the technology can fill a certain space, but it's not infinite. Let's look at book covers, for example, because I've actually had this example. So in the early days, I'm like, I'm going to try see if I can't use AI to generate my cover. And I described in painful detail how I wanted my cover to look. I wanted basically a flat earth. I said I wanted to look like somebody took a mountain and cleaved off the bottom and sent it ass first through the stars. It's going to be trailing ice behind it. It's going to have this giant fountain in the middle, this geyser in the center that's blowing on like that. It's going to act like a giant shield, and it's going to go through with this nebula in the background. And it brain farted. It could not even try. Right? The images I got didn't even look like anything. Right? And that's when I hit headfirst into the limits of AI. AI is these things are large language models. They're basically huge databases of train of ideas, right? You tell it to do a cat video, yeah, it knows what a cat is. It's been sent a gajillion images of cats. Remember how the LLM works, right? It's got this this mathematical abstracted concept of an image, like let's say a cat, and you tell it to render a cat. It doesn't know anything about cat anatomy. It doesn't know what cat eyes look like. It just knows what this image is. And so it's going to keep throwing pixels at the screen until it forms an image that is similar to what it knows before. When I was trying my book cover, there was no flat planets for it to compare because flat planets don't exist. It had nothing to compare it to. You could tell it to render a regular planet, no problem. Kick that out like that. Because we have all kinds of photographs of real planets. We have artists' renditions of planets. Flat planet doesn't know what that is, so it struggled. Had a similar experience not too long ago. I was running ideas through ChatGPT saying, hey, kick out some t-shirt ideas for me. And for the record, ChatGPT is horrible for doing t-shirts because it doesn't understand, you know, the whole transparency layer printing on the thing. It just wants to create an image for you, not necessarily something that goes on a t-shirt. But I was kicking around some ideas, and I showed it images of my tikbalong that I have built in real world, painted in the real world, the whole nine yards. And again, it struggled. It kept throwing in extra legs. It kept, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And I finally realized it thinks it's a horse. It's got it in its head that it's a horse. So it's trying to make this guy running on two legs that has a horse's head be a horse. I mean, there's one point where it was almost like a centaur because it had a whole second horse body. And I'm like, okay, I'm hitting the wall of what this LLM can do because again, it can't when it goes outside of its training data, it struggles. So when you create something that is new, that it has never heard of before, that doesn't exist in the real world, you're hitting that wall. And AI is going to fail. And I think that's where we as artists and authors can go. It knows the collective works of humanity, right? It knows. So let's write something that doesn't exist yet. Let's write something in a style that doesn't exist yet. And I know some of you are going, but all the styles exist. Everything's been written. Let's be creative. Let's come up with some plot beats that even the AI couldn't think of. Let's think of ways to write the book in ways that the AI has not thought of trying because it hasn't been done before. And I know this sounds very simple. Oh, just do something new. No, this is incredibly difficult, right? We've been writing stories since like the Iliad. I mean, we've been printing books since the invention of the printing press. We know how to tell a story, and now here's some guy in a podcast saying like, throw out the book and just do something completely different. Yeah, no problem, right? But maybe that's what we need to do as authors. We need to start thinking outside the box. We need to write something that the AI could not write. We need to write something in a way that the AI would never think of writing because it's never been done before. And I think that's going to be the challenge. If AI sticks around, if AI becomes a permanent fixture in our lives, I think that's going to be more of a challenge for us. But I think it's one that we can face. I think it's one that we can do. I think we will differentiate ourselves from AI slop by doing what AI can't really do, and that's be creative and do something new. So, I know that's a long rant. Tell me what you think. Am I way off base? Am I, dreaming, or am I on to something here? Let me know in the comments. So that leaves us enough time for this week's showcase, and I am thrilled for this one. To Die For by Greta Boris. I enjoyed this book a lot. Let's go from the little blurb on the back of the book. Imogene's client has a special request. The only hitch is the client is dead. It's an ordinary day at Harry's hair stop until Imogene hears her favorite client's dying wish. 2 days later, she finds herself in the embalming room at Greener Pastures Mortuary, bottle of hair dye and scissors in hand. Styling her client's hair for the funeral is creepy. She expected that. But she hadn't expected the body to buzz like it was loaded with corpse caffeine. Was it her imagination, or was something more sinister at play? Determined to prove her sanity, she teams up with the mortuary's handsome night watchman to investigate. Through a series of hair-raising twists, they discover the client's death, just like her hair color, wasn't as natural as everyone thought. In fact, this was one in a string of murders. Someone is killing off the residents of Liberty Grove. It's up to Imogene to find the murderer before the murderer finds her. If you can imagine Agatha Raisin as a 20-something rockabilly hairstylist with a weird connection to the dead, this book is for you. What did I like about this? First of all, a lot. Okay? First of all, it takes place here in Orange County, so she's like mentioning, and this is more of a personal thing, but she's mentioning like roads and landmarks and everything like that I pass by every day. So I'm like really kind of getting into the book on that sense. It is a supernatural murder mystery. She is basically getting vibes from the dead and hints that she needs to do something. And she's a very reluctant hero. She doesn't want to get involved. She keeps trying to pass the buck several times in this thing and get back to her life. I think that's a very natural reaction to somebody who's experiencing the supernatural for the first time is get me the hell out of here, right? I thought the characters were very unique. They had kind of a Carl Hyacin vibe. What do I mean by that? Carl Hyacin's characters tend to be um, maybe not dialed to 11, but dialed really high, right? Um, the bad guys tend to be idiots to the point where they're almost the comic relief, right? They're so stupid that you have to laugh at them. I remember, I think it was Lucky You, where the main antagonists were a couple of racist a-holes that were uh, these right-wing extremists that kept wanting to have to defend the country from the NATO communists. Just try to think about that term in your head for a couple times and watch it ping back and forth because it makes no damn sense. They were, I mean, they were so ill-informed that Carl Hyacin would make fun of them, right? Like they were very racist, but they came up with a name for their group. I forgot what the name was, but it turned out that the name was actually belonging to an old black music group. And they're like, but they're black. It's like, and the waitress like, yeah, I think it's supposed to be like sarcasm, you know. They're, oh, well, we need to change our name to something else. Meanwhile, their third member is having it tattooed on their arm. That kind of idiocy, right? But they're very colorful. right? Uh, they always have like little quirks that make them stand out. There was one character that had a pet barracuda. Um, he lived on these stilt houses. Barracuda lived underneath it, and he would feed it, and didn't really tame the barracuda, but the barracuda was trained to expect food whenever he came in and threw something in there, to the point that when the bad guy showed up and his hand went in the water and his shiny Rolex caught the light, the barracuda thought, "Feeding time!" and bit the hand off. So now you have a bad guy missing a hand and he decides that he needs a prosthetic. Does he get a fake hand? No. Does he get a hook? No. What does he do? He decides the best prosthetic is the head of a weed whacker that he wires into a battery that he puts on his belt. Why? Because he's moonlighting as a bouncer, and that weed whacker isn't lethal, but it stings like a mofo. And so when breaks are going out, people are breaks or fights are breaking out, he goes in there. Okay, I'll behave. I'll behave. That happens in Carl Hiaasen books, right? Greta Boris's characters are maybe a step below Carl Hiaasen, but they're on that scale, right? They're very memorable. They got their own little quirks, and I was really getting Hiaasen vibes from that book. It's like Hiaasen light. And I mean that as a compliment, right? What parts didn't work for me? I will say that not a lot didn't work for me. I was really into this book. In terms of a murder mystery, I think that was um it's the first book in the series. I thought the murder mystery was a little kind of like you can kind of see where it was going. Um wasn't a huge amount of surprises there. There was a couple of red herrings, and I'm kind of like, that's going to be a red herring, isn't it? Yeah, it turned out to be. That part was pretty easy. I don't think that's a huge negative, considering that there's so much character development going on in the book that the murder mystery is almost a subplot at that point, right? Um, it didn't lean as hard into the supernatural elements as I hoped it would. In fact, it had a very light touch with the supernatural elements, which again is not really a critique. It was just something I was hoping more for, right? So the first time she's washing the client's hair and she gets like this jolt, and that's the first indication that she has some supernatural connection to the dead, and she doesn't understand it, and there's no big red sign that's saying supernatural stuff is happening now. She's just like, what was that? Is there a loose outlet? What the hell happened? Later on down the book, she's doing another client at the mortuary, and she gets kind of another vibe, but it's a very, very different vibe. And she's like, I don't know how to explain it, but I just felt like I had to make this the best funeral for her as possible. I felt very connected to this person. So throughout this book, she has this kind of supernatural thing happening, but doesn't really recognize it as such. Which, on the one hand, for somebody who is into supernatural stuff, I wanted more of that. I literally wanted like ghosts pop up, go, avenge me, kind of thing. That doesn't happen. But on the other hand, it's it kind of is very realistic, right? Like, if you hit the supernatural for the first time, you're not going to go, oh, well, that's supernatural stuff, obviously. Yeah. That was actually one of the criticisms I had with a friend of mine when I did my book, The Baby Eater, because he was like, how dense is this guy? I was like, what do you mean? He says, he's seeing all this stuff. He's seeing all these monsters, and he's still saying like there's got to be a logical explanation. I was like, the dude's in denial. I was like, well, obviously there's a monster. It's like it's obvious for you. You're the reader. You know there's a monster. He just got off the plane from California. He doesn't know anything about this stuff. One of the biggest critiques I had in a Stephen King book was from The Outsider, which I thought was an excellent book. Loved the book, but there was one part that just did not ring true to me out of the entire book. And that's when Holly Dimney is called in to investigate all these things. And she comes back. She says, yeah, it's basically the boogeyman. And most of the people on the table go, okay, so what do we do? And I'm just like, that's it? You just accept this? Now, some of them are going to be more accepting than others because more of them had seen some weird shit. But that's just sort of general, like, supernatural. Okay, cool. Next order of business. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Where in the real world would you just sort of just nod and go with that? So for her to have these supernatural experiences and not really recognize them, and they are subtle, right? There's one point where she's looking for her friend, she gets kind of misdirected, and she winds up back at the grave of her first client. Towards the end of the book, she's like explaining all this stuff to her grandma, and her grandma's like, oh, I think she's trying to tell you something. And she's like, no, I just got lost, right? The supernatural stuff is so subtle it could be explained away. And that didn't work as well for me because I wanted more of a supernatural thing. But in terms of a very realistic book, I think it worked well. So um less of a flaw in the book and just more of a I I I personally would have dug that more, but I don't necessarily think that's the right call, if that makes any sense. I am going to shoot myself. So it's less about it being the wrong call and more about what Chad personally wants, really, is what it boils down to. But that's all right. The one thing that really annoyed me about the book, though, and again, this is going to be a me thing. This is not anything wrong with the book. This is not anything wrong with how it's written. It's just a me thing. The asshole ex boyfriend in the book was named Chad. I get it. Chad is a douchey name. I know.
He's a normie. He's a Chad. Am I using that right?
Dealt with it for 54 years. Not the greatest name in the world. At best, I am some snot-nosed, preppy, rich kid that's like the third grandchild of Winston Howell the Third. I say, Buffy, you should come with us over to the yacht club. We're going to take a quick jaunt around Catalina. Ha ha ha. No, okay? At worst, I am the douchebag boyfriend who is totally broke, has no money, and is only interested in weed. Yeah, I know your birthday's coming up and all. And I was thinking I could get a job and I could get you something real nice. But then I thought, hey, how about I write you this song? You got money for weed? Not a lot of good Chads in the world, right? You've had Chad Everett, you've had Chad Lowe, you have me. I was trying to look up famous Chads. They came up with Chadwick Boseman. I'm like, I don't think Chadwick Boseman counts because he's not a Chad. He's a Chadwick, right? My name is not Chadwick. It is Chad. Chadwick, actually, I don't know if that'd be even better or worse, but at least then I would have Chadwick Boseman go, I have his name. No, I don't even have that, right? Does Chadwick count as a Chad? I don't know. I don't think so. I think Chadwick is his own category. And, um, I mean, I would like to include Chadwick Boseman just to get our numbers up, if you know what I mean. But I think you're splitting hairs if you're. I think you're stretching if you're saying a Chadwick and a Chad are the same name. I don't know. I'm not buying that argument. But you let me know. Is Chadwick a Chad? Is Chadwick Boseman a Chad, or is he a Chadwick? I think he's a Chadwick myself, personally. Probably the most awesome Chadwick in the world, but still a Chadwick. Anyway, that part irked me, but that again is a personal gripe. That has nothing to do with the book or the author or anything like that. I was just like, of course, of course. So, in spite of the fact that the ex-boyfriend douchebag was named Chad. I really enjoyed this book. Again, you should give it a try. Um, Quirky characters, a bit of a murder mystery, a little bit of supernatural elements, all mixed together. To Die For, die with a Y. We're starting with a pun. We're off to the races. This was a good book. This was one of the better books that I have read so far this year. In fact, I think this is contender for book of the year. To be honest, I'm going to put it right out there. We're about halfway through the year. Between this and All Dead, I think are our first two real contenders for book of the year at this point. Because we've had a lot of good books, but these were phenomenal. So, anyway, that is that. Again, might not make it the next couple weeks. I'm going to be busy. If I'm here, great. If not, I'll explain why in a couple weeks where I've been. See you all in Sacramento in September. And until then, keep on reading.